Please welcome the panel on Decision 2024, U.S. Elections in Focus, moderated by Senior Fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Aaron Murphy.
Everybody, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our audience online, and thank you for joining us. We're here to talk about an election that no one's really paying attention to, so, it's going to be a really dry and boring session. So, to say that these are unprecedented times is like, saying the sky is blue. But here we are. It's the U.S. election. I tried to look at X and the news to make sure that we didn't miss any major developments, but we might have. So, audience, if something happened, please flag it for us. I am joined by an excellent panel here who's going to try to make sense of everything that is going on, answer all your burning questions, and basically solve the American electoral system. So it's going to be great. To my left, we have Kevin Hassett, who is the Managing Director of Economic Mobility at the Milken Institute. Next, we have Matt Kaminsky, Editor-at-Large for Politico. Then we are joined by Saleha Mohsin, Senior Washington Correspondent of Bloomberg News, and I should note also author of a book called Paper Soldiers, available wherever you can get books. Then we have Richard White, who is, he's at the end. We're going to go with Anthony Scaramucci, founder and managing partner of Skybridge Capital. And now we will go to Richard White, Director, Global Attitudes Research, Pew Research Center. So we've got it all. We got polls, we've got political experts, we have journalists. So get ready, folks. I'm going to go right into it. These folks have to answer all of my questions. My reign of terror begins now. Kevin, I'm going to ask you the first question.
Oh, okay.
American elections have been driven by economic and pocketbook issues. Inflation and high prices are at the top of mind of most Americans, but are there other economic issues that you think are concerning voters right now?
Sure. Inflation is the number one thing if you look at the polls, and it's a very common cycle that we see in economic history. What happens is that prices adjust quickly, but wages adjust slowly. And so when there's an inflation, then the prices go up, but it might be a year until you get a wage adjustment, and so you feel it throughout the year. And so cumulatively right now, there's been way more than 20% inflation, and for a lot of people, their wages haven't kept up. And it's especially true for the things you got to buy. If there's a thing that you maybe don't have to buy and the price goes up, then maybe you don't buy it. But if it's milk, eggs, bacon, things like that gasoline, then you have to buy it. And so people really, really feel it. And so that's the first thing that I think that people are concerned about is inflation. But the thing that I think, as I look at the global economy, the thing that I'm concerned about is just that there are a lot of really important policies that are about to expire. And the history of this, I wrote an academic paper about this once, is that when there's a lot of uncertainty about whether the tax rate is going to be 28%, as Vice President Harris has proposed, or 15%, as President Trump has proposed, that when there's that kind of uncertainty, then there's a huge gain to waiting. You get kind of an option value to not build your factory because if you're going to change the size of it depending on what goes on with this. So the other thing that I'm really concerned about, and I think people are starting to be concerned about this, including it's one reason I think why the Fed just cut rates, is that when there's that kind of uncertainty, then people hold off and wait for the election to make a capital purchase or something like that. And very often the relative odds of recession double. And I think it's going to be bigger than that because the policy differences are so large. And final thought is just that the Fed was right to cut rates 50 basis points because the unemployment rate in the U.S. is signaling that a recession began in August. Other data aren't so clear, but the Fed is being cautious and appropriately so, and they're not being political.
So I do actually want to follow up on the Fed point because that was pretty big news yesterday. Do you think that this is going to have any impact in the short term for Americans economically? And, will there be accusations that this might be a political move?
I don't think so. And I saw President Trump actually spoke, I thought, appropriately about it in some interviews. But the fact is, if the Fed were going to be political, this year, then it would have started cutting rates in January. Because it takes a long time for interest rates to affect the economy. You know, I used to work with Alan Greenspan at the Fed. It was one of my first jobs when I was a kid. And he said it's like steering this Queen Mary. I don't even know if that boat still exists. But it's like steering the Queen Mary. And so, again, if the Fed were going to be political, they would have started a long time ago.
Thank you for that. We're going to take an international view, Matt. So I'm going to turn to you and say, or ask you, what are the prevailing international views of America in this election? Are there fears of us being able to hold a nonviolent and democratic election and undertake a peaceful transition? What do they think of the candidates as well?
I think it also depends where you are and who you ask. The one thing, there's always a statement that Canadians had about America, that, you know, living next door to America is living above the loudest house party in the world.
Or a
and
meth
I
lab.
think the whole world is living above the loudest house party in the world.
They haven't lived next to Scaramucci before.
Maybe most of that noise is coming from
Anthony.
Despite what Kevin says, I'm not as loud as Donald Trump. I think we can stipulate that.
Look, I mean, it's really quite, I think people are, the world does not get a vote, but the world is affected by the outcome, and in very different ways. I was just in Ukraine, and obviously there people are, you know, it's really an existential election for them. At least that's the way they are thinking, depending on who comes out on top. But I think there's, being out in Asia too, people are quite savvy and sophisticated about our politics, and I think they are seeing what a lot of us who are quote-unquote insiders are seeing, that, you know, this is really more of a personality election, or the question is it a personality election or is it a policy election? Mm-hmm. And what I can pick up on is that people are able to distinguish between, look, Donald Trump is the best performance artist in politics anywhere. And that really benefits him in the primaries. It is not, I think it may be his handicap in the election. If character is the main issue, then the majority of Americans are not going to vote yes for him. The irony is that I think Trump's, politically, in terms of the policy prescriptions, one, he's been very consistent, and two, he is, and I think this is actually reassuring for the world, that he is so unpredictable, except he's quite predictable in the kinds of, in where he has steered America when he was president and the kinds of policies he supports. Whereas Harris is the much more sane candidate, potentially a new kind of change in terms of who she is. But in policy terms, she is unpredictable. She's a little bit more out of the mainstream than Donald Trump. And I think paradoxically, we may end up, if Trump does get into power, end up kind of knowing sort of in which direction we will go policy-wise, whereas Harris, you know, she was quite far left in 2019. She's now able to repivot toward the center. But I think there may be actually more questions. And the last thing I'll say, because she never went through a primary, so she hasn't been really forced to kind of come clean on exactly what a Harris administration would look like.
So I want to follow up on this. So what are you seeing in terms of, do Americans care about policy? So back to the U.S., do they care about policy? Do they care about personalities? It seems that both sides have their base. Trump definitely has his base. So where do you think that people are paying attention?
I think people definitely care about inflation, mm-hmm. and they care about the other I word, immigration. And those would seem to favor Donald Trump, which is, I think if you make the case for Trump, he's going to win on those two things. And again, paradoxically, Trump's this giant personality, but if he does win, I think Americans will think with their pocketbook and with their perception of how well the country's being governed at the border. The other issue, the other I, is incumbency. And this is a really interesting one because, you know, Harris is part of the incumbent administration. She's part of the team that's run the country for the last 4 years. Americans, every poll shows they're unhappy with the direction of the country. There's a global mood against incumbents that would seem to favor Trump. Yet, Trump is kind of an incumbent because he was president just 4 years ago. And Harris has kind of done this magical trick. As you see from the poll, she's a little bit ahead, came out of the convention very well, where she is the anti-incumbent in the sense that she is new, she's the next generation. And I think if she can keep that kind of excitement Because the other thing Americans agree on is we hated the choice of Biden v. Trump. That was the vast majority. Don't want these two. One is 81, one is about to be 79. So I think if she can maintain that kind of aura around, I am new, I am exciting, I am going to be the first woman president, I am the next generation, and kind of keeps down the more kind of practical concerns about inflation and immigration, then I would think she has the advantage coming out in 47 days.
47 days. So I'm going to pick up on the polling part that you mentioned. And Richard, I'm going to jump to you. Can you give us any insight into polling? And I think what I'm really interested to hear from you is who is being polled? How are these polls being conducted? Do they account for generational views and attitudes? Because, I mean, I know for many generations, and that includes myself, my phone has been on silent since 2012, and I never pick it up. Half the time it's spam calls. So how are these polls being conducted, and what sort of results are you seeing? Because some we see neck and neck, and some we see a pretty big disparity in states that are in play.
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge to get a representative sample of people, which is what all pollsters aim to do. That includes young people. You have to work hard to get them into your sample, but the good pollsters out there are trying to get a representative sample that includes young people as well. I mean, one of the big challenges, as most of you probably know, is that in 2016 and 2020, a lot of polls underrepresented the Trump vote, right? And part of the reason why is that Trump has been effective quite often at getting some people to turn out to vote who don't always vote in elections. And some of those same people are less likely to want to participate in surveys. But what you see this cycle is that pollsters are taking steps to try to address that. Most pollsters have changed their methods. One example is they're increasingly using more sophisticated methods to weight the data. As you probably know, when pollsters get the data back, they generally weight it, statistically adjust it so it matches the population they're trying to estimate. If you go back a few years, a lot of pollsters were maybe weighting it by age and gender and race. Now they've added many more variables to the equation. I think we're weighting it by maybe 12 variables at this point. So, all that should make the samples more representative at the end of the day and avoid some of the problems we've seen in the last couple of cycles. Pollsters are also using different methods to try to reach voters, to try to talk to respondents. Again, if you go back a few years, you might have seen a pollster just doing the entire survey online, and quite often now they've gone back and added phone surveys back into the mix, right? We'd all kind of moved away from calling people on the phone, but it turns out that might actually be a good way to reach some of these Trump supporters that we've missed the last couple of cycles. You'll see pollsters using online surveys mixed in with phone surveys. Some pollsters are using text-based methods to try to reach voters. So, overall, there's a broader mix in terms of how we're trying to reach voters, get that representative sample that includes young people, includes Trump supporters, etc. But it's very difficult. A lot of things are happening day by day in this race. It's a very, very close race. So you could come within, a point or two of estimating somebody's vote correctly and still get the winner wrong, right? Because it's so
Richard, do you think there's a
close.
Bradley effect? Do you think that people are saying they're going to vote for Vice President Harris, but they may not? They don't want to be perceived to be racist, like what happened with Tom Bradley in Los Angeles 20 plus years ago?
And similar to Trump in 2016 as well.
Yes,
I don't think a
exactly.
lot of people admitted that they were going to vote for him.
It's a good question. It's something like, it's come up a lot over the years, I think, in different races, right? Most pollsters or political scientists who have looked at this don't think that's the big factor, really. It's not so much that people aren't, willing to admit they're voting for Trump or they're not telling the truth when we interview them. What the consensus has mostly been is that it's really that we're missing them. They're more likely, again, to I don't want to talk to pollsters. I don't trust pollsters. These media polls, I don't want to participate in them because I don't trust the media. Those kind of things seem to be a bigger factor than something like the Bradley effect, although, you always want to keep your eye out for that because it's been raised in the past.
Will there be a Taylor Swift effect? Because we're starting to see thousands and thousands of people registering to vote.
She seems to have an impact on getting people to register at the very least, right? So I wouldn't write her off at all.
It's an interesting time, folks. Anthony, I'm going to turn to you as well because, we're talking about polls, we're talking about views of the candidates. So from a business perspective and also from your own experience, how does the business community view these candidates? I mean, there's more trust for former President Trump on the economy. Are you still seeing that? And also I want to kind of pick up on the question I asked for Matt about, the policy versus personality. What are you seeing in terms of what voters are interested in?
So it is interesting. He was polling ahead of her, but that has narrowed since the debate. And so the Marist poll last night had them even on the economy. But I would say that if you poll Wall Street people, they're for Trump. And if you poll some of the billionaires in Silicon Valley, even though the vocal ones like Elon Musk are for Trump, I think it's probably even there in terms of how people feel. But, when I thought about the election, when Biden and Trump were running against each other, it was weekend at Bernie's or weekend at Joe Biden's. And it was one flew over the cuckoo's nest. We could take somebody that shouldn't be president because he's too old, or we could take somebody that's absolutely crazy and likely needs a lobotomy. Those were the two choices. And so now it's one flew over the cuckoo's nest versus 42. I don't know if you saw that movie, but 42 is where Jackie Robinson in 1947 crossed into the baseball diamond and became the first African-American professional sports athlete. And it was a transformative situation in the United States. And you don't get Muhammad Ali without Jackie. You don't get Martin Luther King Jr. without Jackie. You don't get Barack Obama without Jackie. And she's here now, and I think she's building a coalition that is going to shock people. It's not just the Taylor Swift registrations, but she invited me into the spin room last week to represent her, and I went on local radio in Philadelphia. And I will tell you that the support for her is mushrooming now. And then you have to ask yourself rhetorically, how well known is Donald Trump? He's got 100% name saturation. He has a high floor, but he's never been able to go past 47.5% in terms of where his ceiling is. So I think she's going to shock people. I think it looks close right now, but this is very reminiscent to me to the 1980 election where Carter and Reagan looked very close. But towards the end, it broke for Reagan. And I think she's building that coalition. I'll just say this last thing about her, because I've now spent time with her and her staff. You have to think of the discipline here. On the 21st of July, she's flipping pancakes for her nieces. She's called by President Biden into service to be the presumptive nominee. She's got to bear that coalition and put those delegates together, get herself to the convention. She's got to formulate a strategy to make sure that there's no internecine warfare prior to the convention. She then has to prepare herself for the debate. And she does something that politicians don't like doing. She expands the tent. Bernie Sanders, Anthony Scaramucci, and Dick Cheney walk into a bar. Now, I'll give you the punchline after the election, depending on how it goes. But I just want you to think about the tent expansion. I want you to think about she's calling the 40, the famous 40. Kevin's still with Trump, God bless him, and Kevin's a great economist, and thank God he's with Trump, because if Trump wins, you want people like Kevin with him. But there are 40 of us that are not with him, 40 of us that would tell you how dangerous he is, and 40 of us that would tell you that he should be nowhere near the Oval Office. And she's calling those people, and she's expanding her tent, and she's going to win the election, and this will be 42 versus one flew over the cuckoo's nest before it's over.
And we also had a former candidate with a brainworm. So again, things are really normal, folks. Anthony, I want to follow up with you, and then Kevin as well, that just on the perceptions of the candidates, Donald Trump says crazy things, Haitians eating pets. Is there anything that he could do that would make him lose his base? They seem really stuck to him. And then the other question, and this is to both of you, is how is Kamala Harris running herself? Because you would think, so Hillary Clinton ran as, the first, potentially the first woman president, but at least to me it seems that Kamala Harris is running as Kamala Harris, not necessarily as a first woman president, not necessarily as a first Indian American president or the Black American. How do you think she's running as herself?
So I think the first thing I want to say is I'm very sympathetic to the Trump base. I grew up in middle-class America. My dad was a crane operator. He was an hourly worker. When I traveled with Mr. Trump, I did 71 campaign stops with him. We saw families, I would describe my family growing up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s as aspirational blue-collar family. The families that we saw on the campaign were economically desperational. And so the system has breached, and they are not treating those families fairly. That would be true also in the United Kingdom, where you saw a Brexit. It's true here in this country, and they see him as an orange wrecking ball. They see him as someone that will bring the system down because the system is not working for their families. And the great irony about this is that the Biden administration has put 3 or 4 pieces of legislation in place that are actually helping those families. We're reshoring manufacturing. We're building microprocessor foundries in the country. We have a Bridge, Roads, and Tunnels Act disguised in the Inflation Reduction Act, which is lowering the cost of goods and services in transit and increasing middle-class wages. But the president, because he's 81 years old and he forgets the script when he gets to the stage, he can't advocate the economic agenda that he's put together. And I think you'll start to see that now from the vice president. But I am sympathetic to those people, and Mr. Trump is correct. He can shoot people on Fifth Avenue, and those people will stay with him because they feel left out of the system. And by the way, if you are an internationalist in this room, that problem has to be solved for all of the leading democracies. There are 25% of the people that have disaffected, and until you solve that system, you're not going to strengthen the alliances necessary to put down the internecine tribal conflicts around the world, places like Ukraine, places like the Middle East. They are being disrupted because we are not coherent anymore. And it provides an opportunity and space for authoritarianism or terrorism. But last piece, she's running as herself, which I give her a lot of credit for, but she's working. Mm-hmm. And it always bothered us on the Trump campaign because we didn't understand the methodology. Secretary Clinton, she came out of the convention. She didn't visit Wisconsin one time after the convention. Yeah. We could not figure that out. We were in a manic scramble to get to Wisconsin. We did 13 visits to Wisconsin after the Republican convention, 0 visits for the secretary. We were in a farm field 48 hours before. I think Kevin would probably remember this. We were in a farm field in Pennsylvania in the middle of nowhere. My family's from the state. I know the state well. The secretary was in a Coliseum where the 76ers play. She was with Jay-Z, Beyonce, Bruce Springsteen, John Bon Jovi in Philadelphia. Mr. Trump was in a farm field. He said, she has them, but you have me. 12 times into Pennsylvania, 1 time for Secretary Clinton. He won the state. And I'm just letting you know, she's well aware of what happened, and she's out there working. And I think she's going to surprise people with where she's going and what she does.
Kevin, quickly.
Sure. But I'm not going to go super quickly because Anthony got a lot of time.
Okay.
And he was saying a lot of
but
provocative stuff.
Slay has some time too.
But I am in your reign of terror. I understand. The first thing I want to say, though, is that Anthony is a good friend of mine, and he has very strong feelings. And I think
they're
that
fighting backstage.
But one of the things, he has a bodyguard because I'm here. No, just
right
easy.
Over there.
but the point I just want to say is that, like, if my wife comes to me and says I'm really upset about something, as a husband, you don't say you're wrong to be upset. It's like, why are you upset? And I think that in American politics, one of the problems is that people don't listen to each other. And the Trump supporters are really upset with the Democrats, and the Democrats are really upset with the Trump people. And rather than think that, like, you're wrong to be upset, I wish everybody would try to say, well, let me try to understand why you're upset. And I think that attitude is one reason why Anthony and I can still stay friends. That he and I can talk about our differences and stay friends. And I just wish everybody would try to shoot for that. On Harris being herself, I've not met her. But as a policy analyst, not a political analyst, the thing, again, that concerns me is that I don't know what her self is, and I also know, but I do know, I think, what her party stands for. And so if you look at the things that she's proposed recently, for example, there was an effort to end the filibuster to stack the Supreme Court. There was an effort to end the filibuster to pass the Green New Deal. That effort failed because of Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. Neither one of them is willing to run again in the Democratic Party because, they basically are run out of the party for ending those, unconstitutional efforts. If you look at Mexico right now, everybody's downgrading Mexico because they're trying to stack the judicial system, which is something that Harris is on the record as supporting, and supporting taxes on unrealized capital gains, raising the capital gains rate to 44.6%, raising the corporate rate to 28%, which would be a 7% increase, the largest increase in a developed country in memory. Ending fracking, ending offshore drilling. Those are things that recently she supported, a subset of those that she says she now doesn't support. And so my concern is that it could be that what happened was that she was a good party soldier and she was just supporting the party and saying, I agree that we should end fracking or that we should stop having internal combustion engines, and that she was doing that because that was what her party was doing. And now she's a leader and she gets to be the person that we're starting to see a little more of that's more moderate. But I can tell you, and I was fortunate enough to serve with Anthony in the White House a little bit, that when you're in the White House, you don't get to decide what policy is all by yourself. Congress does what Congress does. And so the party that wanted to do all that stuff is, if she wins, the party that's going to be running the House and the Senate, and they're going to pass bills that do those things. Is she going to veto them? That's the kind of stuff that I would really like to know. And so, we have a little bit of time, and she's got one of the hardest political jobs that I've ever seen. She's got to run a general election with just a few months of preparation. But we got to find out who she is. And I think the uncertainty over that is the big economic uncertainty hanging over the election.
Saleha, I'm going to turn to you. Speaking of policies, getting back to the U.S., but also how this plays internationally, trade and tariffs. Republicans used to be the party of trade. Now no party is the party of trade. And Trump is pushing for more tariffs as well and ripping up things like the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, of which Singapore is a signatory as well as other countries in the region. What sort of message does this send to partners and allies, but also to potential competitors like China or others in the region?
Well, this is something that both Kevin and Anthony have already kind of told us, that Trump changed both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party by listening to an unhappy electorate. He went to states and towns that usually a presidential candidate never really went to, didn't really pay attention to, stood on the farms and said, I'm here for you, I'm going to listen to you. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton was calling them deplorable and saying, and Democrats had a little bit of a habit of hearing the problems of an unhappy electorate and thinking that they knew better. We know what the solutions are going to be rather than what Trump might be saying, because tariffs sound crazy. And all of a sudden, if you listen to Joe Biden's first State of the Union address, the first 10 minutes could easily have been Trump's State of the Union address. He's talking about Buy America, which sounds a lot like America First. And so one thing to remember is that both parties are protectionist parties now, and that's because of Trump, and the electorate and Congress, lawmakers are all happy about that. But globally, that means we're entering a phase where economic weaponry is here to stay for a little while. The U.S. has been addicted to sanctions since 9/11. Every president since then, both Republican and Democrats, lawmakers, all happy with how economic sanctions have worked for a long time, and now it's tariffs. Trump talking about 100% tariffs if you abandon the dollar. There's a lot of discussion about how that would or wouldn't work, but everyone knows that Trump you can't call his bluff. He might actually enact those. So I think that's the other thing to remember, is that besides both parties now being populist parties, both parties are now going to be leaning into economic weaponry, just with one with a little bit less heated rhetoric, and the other one is just going to be much more upfront about it.
Matt, did you have something?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think there are going to be two big tests for the U.S. on the international stage, whoever wins. One will be on security, and the other one will be on sort of global economics. There's certainly a new consensus in the U.S. around protectionism, around industrial policy. It's proving to be contagious because the Europeans are now, hey, we invented industrial policy, we're going to do it better than you guys do. But I think the other one is going to be security. And again, probably, Ukraine's going to be the most immediate decision that both have to make. How How hard do we lean in to support the Ukrainians? I think, and I wouldn't assume that Trump is necessarily going to kind of really pull the cord on support for the Ukrainians. He is saying, I want to deal with Putin. But the broader question with the Ukraine, that if you put to Trump that this war is really about our relationship with all our allies. Mm-hmm. And if it's a war, it's also a war where China is the sort of the power that sort of looms in the background, supporting Putin, supporting the Ukrainians. And very soon you're going to come to very hard conversations about Taiwan and all the various security relationships we have in this part of the world, including with Singapore.
And so the U.S. has 5 treaty allies in the region. We've heard Trump's comments on NATO. So, Matt, if I can continue on that thread, what do you think we're going to see? Because I think, Kamala Harris, you could probably see continuation of, America first, but, allies as well. What should folks in the region think? Should they be worried that he's going to pull troops out of South Korea? Should Ukraine be really concerned about his dealings with Putin?
I think for both of them, we may be surprised. I think with Harris, because she's going to be the first female president, I think she will have to project strength. Yeah. And by the way, Biden is quite cautious on, he had the debacle in Kabul, pulled out, really betrayed, I think, a promise made to the Afghans. And the Ukrainians, again, I was just there for several days before coming here. They are very frustrated with the Biden administration. They're just always, a couple of weeks too late. Everything takes too long. Why aren't you helping us beat up Putin? There are no American troops there. The U.S., this is in your interest. Similarly, I think with Trump, it really depends who is in the cabinet. If it's John Jr. and J.D. Vance calling the shots, we'll get a kind of the isolationist Trump, and his base is clearly isolationist. But Trump showed when he was in power that he does not want to be seen as a weakling, and Anthony and Kevin know much better than I do, but if you were to put to him, do you want to be a loser on the world stage and get sort of beaten down by Xi and by Putin, or do you want to kind of sort of punch someone in the nose because we are still the strongest party in the world? I can see him saying, I want to do that, especially if he's got people around him like Bob O'Brien at the NSC, Tom Cotton, Mike Pompeo. And there you're going to see really who will be his cabinet is going to really matter.
Saleha?
Yeah, I think one thing that we kind of forget is that the average American has an appetite to pay a premium on cost of living and things like that if there is a cause behind it. So when the tariffs came down during the first Trump presidency, and there was some of that cost handed over to consumers, and this is before COVID, this is before inflation went the highest since the 1980s, Americans were willing to stomach that because they saw that there was something behind it. It's short-term pain for long-term gain. It was the same thing with the sanctions on Russia. The gasoline costs go up for a couple of months after the war in 2022, and Americans were okay with the U.S. doing that to protect a democracy overseas. And that's one thing that either president who wins can leverage that overseas. And I think, like Matt is saying, Trump would be willing to leverage that even more. And we haven't even gotten to the whole sort of fresh concept that's bubbling in, is the weaponization possibly of supply lines.
And I'd like to follow up with you on that in terms of what are the pain points for America? Because we are, again, that addiction to sanctions, I completely agree, but we're also pushing for more export controls and other economic weaponry. At what point does this push for decoupling? What are Americans going to have to bring back? The refrigerator repair person, the TV repair person? Are you going to pay $300 for jeans? Are we aware as to how extensive this could be? And what do you see going forward?
I think defense economics is going to be an interesting space to watch. The world and Americans themselves rely on the U.S. having such a strong, powerful military. But Trump was the first one to kind of spot that you can use tariffs to protect certain industries, and that the sort of the national security implications, now that we've seen what happened with the pager explosions and what that might mean going forward. We've had our FBI director, Wray, recently testify in Congress that the Chinese Chinese have already created an infrastructure to attack America's critical infrastructure needs, to kind of see, can American will be tested? Will Americans fight back for that? So I think that space, but it's just too soon to say what the average American, what the appetite is, but it's also just in the branding, which Trump does way better than pretty much anyone else.
So we have just a few minutes left. There are other elections going on in the United States. There's not just the president, the House and Senate. Richard, I'd like to ask you about what are you seeing in terms of House and Senate races, and how does that potentially impact? I mean, everyone's focused on the president, but certainly Congress is going to have a real role in future and policy.
Yeah, I think, the polling on House and Senate races in some ways looks a lot like what you see on the presidential race, right? Which is that it's very, very close. Maybe there's been a little momentum for the Democrats, in recent weeks, certainly in the presidential race, in congressional races too. But it's still very close. I think the Washington Post put out a poll yesterday in the crucial swing state of Pennsylvania. It showed, Harris up by 1, the Democratic Senate candidate up by 1, essentially a dead heat. You see that in lots of other states as well. And it points to the fact that no matter what happens with this election, we're going to end up with a United States that is still very divided, very polarized. We at Pew, we do surveys not only in the U.S. and around the world, and what we regularly find is that Americans are more divided, more polarized than just about any other country. And you see the rise of effective polarization in the U.S., right? Not only do I disagree with the other side, but I kind of don't like the other side, right? I don't want my child to marry somebody from the other party. I don't want to live near somebody from the other party. So, I think a big question moving forward after this election is, are there any baby steps that can be taken to address this polarization, this deep divisions we see in the United States? It's certainly not going away overnight. But, is there room for some progress? Because Americans also, they're divided, but they're also exhausted. That's what they tell us in their polls. They're exhausted by the partisanship. They find it stressful to talk about politics with other people, right? So in some ways, they're looking for a chance to get away from all this division. We'll see what happens after the elections.
Well, I think one baby step is this panel leading by example. So great job, everyone. Okay, we have a minute and a half left. So my last question to you, and this is to everybody on the panel, any October surprises that you think?
Yeah, I'll go quick, obviously. The first thing I think is that in this case, the October surprise tends to be a negative. And I think that it's an advantage for President Trump just because we've been looking at him so much since 2016. So it's hard to imagine there'd be a surprise now. And since Vice President Harris is relatively new, then there are probably a lot of things that haven't been discovered about her, some good, maybe some surprising in October. But I think that's the thing is I don't really know what it might be. If I knew it now, it wouldn't be a surprise in October. But I do think that it is a potential vulnerability for her because we have more to learn about her.
Matt?
Do we have any black swans left? We've had the health crisis, which is Biden's kind of live on national television dementia. We've had a sort of democratic coup, essentially, supported by the majority of the country. I think we've had, 2 assassination attempts, just to be kind of forgotten that.
Cutting the head off a whale.
So sort of political violence.
Everything, yeah.
I think natural disaster or some kind of economic disaster, I think would be my 2 guesses.
Saleha?
I didn't see the coup coming. That was a surprise for me.
Yeah, you said it. We did. Political violence. I think it's not any one candidate who's extra vulnerable right now. It's the country that's vulnerable.
Anthony?
I think there's going to be a schism between J.D. Vance and Donald Trump that's going to surprise people. I don't think you can have somebody on the campaign plane saying that the White House is going to smell like curry and there's going to be defuncted call centers in the White House and you're married to an Indian American and your children are Indian American. I don't think he's going to be able to tolerate that, and I think there'll be a schism between the two of them.
Richard?
Yeah, a lot of October surprises in the past have been international in nature, so I think I'd keep an eye out on the international arena. Is there something unlikely, like a ceasefire in the Middle East, that could take place and could shake things up a bit? So I'd keep an eye on international events and see if they might surprise us.
Well, I always love to end a panel on a really happy note, which was exactly what we did today. So everybody, remember to just have fun. If you're an American, please, if you're not registered to vote, please do. If you're not an American, thoughts and prayers, please. We really appreciate it. I want to thank the panelists and the audience for joining us, and please give them a round of applause. Thank you.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.